Hey everyone, Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very excited to dive into the subject we're going to talk about today because it's been coming up on quite a few interviews. And funny enough, I've been meaning to do a conversation about it. And our guest today and myself have been talking about this for a long time. So I'm excited to dive into it. He's kind of like like the Regis Philbin of my show. He's on quite often, and he's a recurring guest. And he always comes on to give us some great information. Our guest today is Edwin Dearborn. Ed, thanks for hanging out with me today, man.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate that. I've never been called the Regis Philbin of anything. So
you're like the Regis Philbin of this podcast, man. We call you in. I say, I have a subject I want to talk about. I know you're brilliant. Can you come on and talk about it?
Regis Philbin. Yeah.
So for people that may not be familiar with you, man, tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm board member of a MedTech company. I'm also offer fractional CMO, Chief Marketing Officer services for brands that are already well established that just want to scale and help them scale through marketing, advertising, and PR processes.
Very cool. And we're going to talk about a thing for today called the Hegelian Dialectic.
Yeah.
A lot of really complicated things, and we're going to do some terms here, man. It's where we're going to start. So let's start with that phrase. What is a dialectic and who is Hegel?
Okay, good. So let me preface this. I will answer those questions, so don't go to sleep quite yet.
If you are sleeping, back up and go back to the first time you heard this word. Anyway, continue.
Right. We will clear up these words. I really want to bring this down to an 8th grade level, not because the people listening to this have an 8th grade education. It's a complex term and concept that can go in a lot of different directions, and I don't want to take it into all. I want to just give a simplistic, pragmatic, how it applies today in our world that people can not only understand, but can fight against and win. And that's the key. It's not like I want this theoretical, I sound like I'm really intelligent at cocktail parties because I can say Hegelian dialectic.
But you've got the beard that makes you be able to get away with it, man.
It does. I look sagacious with this on. So, but what I want is, I understand it enough to, 1, spot it, and 2, win against it. That's the key. I want you to have a pragmatic, applicable knowledge of the Hegelian dialectic, not this 3-hour PBS special deep dive into the history of it. That's not going to get you anywhere other than confused and overwhelmed. So I'm trying to get this down to, how's it occurring in my life, in my community, in my world, and what can I do to be proactive and positive and maybe create some change in the right direction because I see it for what it is.
I'm laughing because when you said PBS special, I'm thinking of those of us out there that watch Masterpiece Theater. Hello, Ed. How are you doing today? No. Let's start with those terms. What is a dialectic, first of all, and who is Hegel?
Okay, so the word dialectic comes from Greek, which means to converse or talk, dialogue. Okay, but in the context of philosophy, a dialectic refers to the process of two opposing views. Ideally, they're conversing, they're talking. So I have this thesis or argument number 1. I have the antithesis, which is argument number 2, which is opposed. Okay. And the purpose of that thesis and antithesis, or argument A and argument B, is to come up with a synthesis, which is a shared value or kind of a compromise between the two. Okay. So you have an idea, I have an opposing idea, and then we're going to discuss and have a dialectic with the purpose to come to an agreement or a synthesis. Now, that's a good thing. 2 people coming together to come to an agreement, even though they have opposing views, to come up with a view that works for both of them is a good thing. Here's the problem, and you have to understand this in context. So Hegel, I'll clear up what Hegelian is. Based on the German philosopher named George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And I wish I could say that with a better German accent.
Why do we have so many problems with German philosophers, man? Like, I don't quite get it. There's so many of those German philosophers all doing crazy shit.
It's that Teutonic kind of barbarian, kind of hit people over the head, conquer the Roman Empire kind of mentality. Probably. I would just think it goes back thousands of years of just kind of their approach to living is my take. I could be wrong. So George Hegel lived from 1770 to 1831, and he had this dialectic idea, which is now being called the Hegelian Dialectic, which is we're going to have a thesis, initial statement or problem, and then we're going to have the antithesis to that, and then we're going to work together. We're going to dialogue that, and we're going to come up with a synthesis. Here's the problem with that philosophy. What if both ideas are bad? What if both ideas are unworkable? It's kind of like, here's this bad recipe with an even worse recipe, and if we come together, we'll have a better recipe. But you may have a terrible recipe. So it's kind of predicated on that these views are, somebody's got some moral goodness in it. But we all know that you can get two stupid people or two evil people together, and it comes up with an even more stupid idea.
And somebody probably voted for both of those people. But anyway.
We won't name names. Of course, this has nothing to do with reality.
No, not at all.
So that's the whole thing, Hegelian. So Hegel was this philosopher saying, this is a way that life goes about, people go about figuring things out. One guy's got an idea, another guy's got an idea. They come together and they come up with a better, a more agreeable idea. But the problem, again, is what if both ideas are bad, or both people are bad actors with bad intentions? You have to have that context when understanding the dialectic, because otherwise you won't know why bad things are happening. So if you just look at it purely philosophically, it lives in a bubble. But now here comes the pragmatism. We can have two bad people vying for a synthesis, which is even worse. It's like you have two cartels in Mexico fighting for Mexico. What happens? A lot of bloodshed and maybe even more cartels, or the cartel in power versus the government. You see? So that could be a Hegelian dialectic. Well, if we just get the two drug lords to come out with a synthesis, they could go, well, the synthesis is the drug lords run the country.
Right.
So again, we have to look in context to the ideas that are being argued and who is arguing them and for what intention. If we don't have that context, then it just becomes this philosophical, oh, isn't that interesting? Okay. Again, I'm trying to be pragmatic at a level that people can understand in today's world versus a philosophical study of a German guy 200 years ago.
Well, I guess my confusion on it, Ed, and maybe you can help me clear this up a little bit, is when I've heard people use the term before, they use it in the way of saying, well, somebody does something with a result already in mind. Meaning meaning they want A to happen because it will make B happen. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, that's the way I've heard it used.
Yes, and that is the pragmatic way that we want to discuss.
Like, for example, like we want to have some sort of electronic passport document. So some large thing would need to happen that would require us to have a large electronic passport document. That's
right. So now Karl Marx, one of the co-founders of the Communist Manifesto, the system of communism, was a student of Hegel. Now, he morphed it into what he wanted. He bastardized the Hegelian dialectic. So the Hegelian dialectic and what's called dialectic materialism, which is Marx's take on it, are different.
Okay.
So,
and is dialectic materialism more of what we see in our modern day, or is that
yes.
just, how does that work?
Yes, absolutely. So let me just, again, let's go back to what Marx's take on this is. So you got Hegelian dialectic, two opposing views, hoping for a synthesis. Marx studies this and in his own perverted, evil way goes, oh, I know what to do with this. To understand Marxism, we have to understand a couple of beliefs within his mind, his demented mind.
Okay.
Number one, there is no God. There is no spirit. Man is a brain. He is an object. He is a one lifetime materialistic blob of chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the idea that two people come together with an idea is not, he doesn't believe that mankind has an idea. He believes that you are a body and then the body generates your thoughts.
Mm.
So you have the school of, I think, therefore I am. That's a spiritual. And then there's I am, therefore I think. That's Marxist.
So that's interesting because it makes sense to me why he would see in Marxism, like everything always comes out of a struggle between two things.
That's right.
Right. That would make sense to me. I could see how that would happen.
Hence, dialectic materialism.
Mm.
So he's taken Hegelian and going, okay, now it's objects. It's forces in conflict with each other. So the key is there is no spirit. Man is not a spirit. He can't determine. It is not I think, therefore I am. I am this object, and that object, therefore I think, and I react. Okay?
Got it.
Okay. The second principle that you have to understand about Marxism is that they believe that the principal evil in the world is property ownership. That this is the core of the conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat. It's over ownership of things. That is the principal reason for the conflict. The bourgeois takes advantage of the proletariat. What for? Capital gain, property rights. If we didn't have capital gain and property rights at the center of conflict, we wouldn't have a bourgeois, we wouldn't have a proletariat. We'd have this awesome environment where everybody shared everything for the greater good, all managed by the state. Mm-hmm. Okay, so property rights is a core evil within Marxism. So you're not a spiritual being, and your desire for things or ownership that's what makes you evil. And that's why you oppress your fellow man.
Got it.
Okay. So now this conflict, let's just take a look at how it manifests today in this world. The state has the synthesis that they're desiring. Like you talked about earlier, like they want a certain outcome.
Okay.
That outcome is the state owns all property. Mm-hmm. That is the Marxist dream. Because if the Marxist utopia controls all ownership, all distribution, then there can't be two people oppressing, one people being oppressed and the oppressor oppressing the proletariat. Mm-hmm. This political body is going to manage everything. So this utopian, there's no conflict. That's the
so that makes sense because they basically need to create this other force so that this conflict happens so that we get to the synthesis, right? Because the second conflict doesn't exist naturally, or it might, but not in amounts that they need it to actually create the synthesis they want.
Right. And the synthesis, the synthesis that they want is you own nothing and you'll be happy about it. Sound familiar?
I think I heard a certain strange German talking about that. You own nothing and you will like it.
Interesting. German, Hegelian.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, because Klaus Schwab, his
Karl
father
Marx.
actually worked for the Nazis as a production house. His company did. Was he
And-
actually German by birth, though, Klaus Schwab? I think he is.
I think so. He might have been Austrian, but it's that it's that region. Also, Karl Marx was from where?
Germany.
Okay.
Because it's interesting too. Because you even look at like, psychiatry. Not a huge fan of that because I think it devalues a lot of people and I think it makes a lot of people less able. Came out of Germany, interestingly enough. But anyway.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that Hegel, Marx, Klaus Schwab, all these demonic individuals, Adolf Hitler, although he was Austrian, but it was part of that.
I don't think that necessarily says something about like the German people, but I think it says something about the ideology that's coming from that part of that part of Europe.
It's an ideology. Absolutely. Okay. So now Marxism does not want any private ownership because they believe that that is going to be a utopian environment that will save the planet and save mankind from themselves. Because mankind doesn't have the spiritual ability to elevate or change this dialectic, this conflict, which they believe is ingrained in mankind. He cannot be good. You're either the oppressor or the oppressed.
Okay.
So therefore, because you don't have the spiritual mental capability of finding goodness or ethics or morals to change that, the state now owns the morals, and we're going to enforce this ownership to make sure that everything's fair. That's the synthesis. Now take a look at modern times. Does the government do things that tell you that you are not in ownership of things? Let's just take a look at the initiatives.
Property taxes, things like that.
Property taxes. We want to take away your weapons. You shouldn't have those type of weapons. You shouldn't. By the way, for the greater good, you need to inject this in your body, or you'll be denied certain rights or certain access, because your body really isn't your own. You're part of this collective. Remember, it's a collectivism. This philosophy. It's all for the greater good. Your individual rights don't matter. Your pursuit of happiness doesn't matter if it conflicts with the overall good of the collective. So therefore, we understand you feel you have a right over your own body, but you need to inject this so that you don't spread this disease to the collective. Now, if you don't submit to the collective, we'll deny you work, we'll deny you food, we'll deny you travel, we'll deny you access to the Raiders game. We're just going to cut you off.
I don't know if it'd be a bad thing to deny access to the Raiders game. They're not very good.
But here in Vegas, where I live, there was a time where you couldn't go to a Vegas Raiders game if you did not have a little passport saying you've been vaccinated. You were denied the right to public access simply because you did not go along with the collective.
So it's the outcomes already in mind. And you know what's interesting as well? So Judge Napolitano, I don't know if you follow his work.
A little bit.
He's a really cool guy. I've had a few conversations with him. But back in 2012, and I guess I'll put this in the show notes for people to take a look at. But this is from Kaneko the Great on Twitter, and this is a videos from 2012. It says Judge Napolitano reported that 17 out of 20 terrorist plots thwarted by the FBI were actually planned, plotted, and controlled by the FBI. So it's interesting, and it's not to say there aren't threats out there, but if you even look at a lot of what we've dealt with, they have a result in mind. So they have to take the threat and make it worse so we can get to that result.
That's right. So here's where this is how it works in practicality. And here's how to fight back against it. They're going to they want this result, but they can't say, hey, look, we want to take all your stuff. And we're going to keep you within a 15-minute range, and you can't travel unless you get a little passcode. You're going to be restricted to your district in this Hunger Game, and you're going to have a cricket burrito and like it. And you can't eat meat because that harms people, and you can't have eggs because that harms people, and you have to inject this in your body so you don't spread it because this is part of the collective, and you can't have this type of fuel in your car. Do you see how it's all going in this direction?
Yes.
Now, if they try to use logic and reason, most people are like, no, I'm pretty happy with that stuff not injected in me, and I like omelets, so I'm going to continue to eat eggs, and I like a good steak, and I'm going to ride my motorcycle and use gas. Sorry, I love your argument, but no. So again, it being an antagonistic in nature, Marxism has to use a forceful, dangerous occurrence to then elicit a reaction. And they already know what their reaction is going to be. Please inject it in me. Please let me have my omelet. Let me go to the Raiders game. So if I create this dangerous occurrence, I know what your reaction is going to be, and you're going to beg for the synthesis, which I've already planned out.
So let me ask you this then, because I think this could be like looking for a boogeyman too. Like you could find it everywhere.
Yep.
So I guess how do you I guess kind of snoop out what's where this is actually really a danger? Because when we're talking about here, like this sounds very dangerous, but I guess when we look at scooping it out, like how do you tell? Obviously, because there's different shades of things. How do you tell the good from the bad in that?
When there's a singular aligned message from government, media, education, and it's all moving in the same direction.
Like when we see those media packages where they'll take 7 different news stations and they'll all be saying
exactly the same thing.
They'll play talking heads and they're all saying, well, it's a threat to our democracy. And they're all playing the exact same quote. And you're like, wow, it's really strange that all those people are saying the exact same thing. It's like they have lines.
Right. You will see the same argument and logic and propaganda almost word for word being said at many, many layers of society. You've got Hollywood actors, stop the spread, the media, stop the spread. It's just very coordinated. You're like, how's Hollywood, colleges and universities, the media from multiple forms, the president, Congress, all within a matter of days saying exactly the same thing?
So let me ask you this then. Like, does it just come from like financial ties? Like, we look at like investment firms out there like BlackRock, State Street, things like that. Does it come from, like their investment ties? Is it motivated by a person, by a group? Because obviously this group agreement's coming from somewhere, right? So what's driving it?
I think that there's a number of organizations at the top that all benefit from this.
Okay.
You could, there's no one, I don't think there's one agency that's in charge of everything. I think there's a multiple, how many drug cartels are there in Mexico?
Probably innumerable, I would imagine.
Okay. And they're all benefiting from the drug trade, right?
Right.
Now they argue between each other and kill each other, but there's also some ground rules, and they probably meet kind of like the mafia does in The Godfather.
So this is similar to like what we were talking about in a previous episode with Seth Holhouse, which is actually why I reached out to you and said, hey, we need to talk about Hegelian dialectic. It's coming up again. When he's talking about, like we look at who controls the power structure of the world. And it's like, well, you look at it and, you had the World Economic Forum, the Chinese Communist Party is a threat. You look at all these different threats. And to a certain extent, they'll coordinate together because it benefits them here. But not one of them's in charge, right? They're all just kind of like saying like, well, this is good for me now. And you kind of are somewhat in alignment with me. So I'll let you do your thing. But if you get in my way, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah. It's a den of thieves. I mean, look, they can see that there's a benefit, It's like, hey, if this drug cartel is able to successfully fight off the government, that kind of helps me learn how to fight off the government. So right. I'm not gonna sit there and take away his business because he's moving an agenda that I will benefit from.
That makes sense.
So I'll let him to continue to win against the government because in that wake of his success, I'll come in. Now, eventually, I want to dethrone him, Game of Thrones,
Sure.
but I'm going to use that momentum to my benefit.
So then how do we differentiate between the ones that are most harmful and the ones that aren't? Because I'm sure there's some out there that aren't as harmful as others. Like, how do we differentiate between those?
Well, I think you have to differentiate what are your values and then who's attacking your values.
That makes
Remember,
sense to me.
they've got to get a reaction. Now, there's a couple of ways that the Marxists, the guys at the top, I call it a cyborg plutocracy.
Well, I think the guys at the top, we're never really going to know who they are either, right? Because they don't want people to know their names.
Right. I think we can know their lieutenants. We can know
we have a good picture of that, right? Like the lieutenants are the people we always talk about, the Soroses, the Schwabs, the Xi Jinpings, people like that.
Yeah. And we can, understand where they're getting their financing. We can understand that plutocracy. There's this elite people of the wealth that control wealth that rule things, and we can kind of get close enough. Maybe we don't have the Dr. Evil of it all, but it doesn't matter. We can still see who are the main players and what are their main messages and what are their plays. That's good enough for us to go, okay, good. That's what I have enough data. I have enough people to know about to fight against.
Sure.
So now cultural Marxism has got many, many mutations. Like cancer, it mutates.
Right. Well, because its goal is to take two groups and pit them against each other, because then those two, which, that goes with our third party law, man. If two people are fighting, that means somebody else is involved, right? But if you look at it, it creates this friction so that it pushes towards that goal.
Right. So the way they get you sucked into this is they know that they've got to create a public spectacle that will get you to react emotionally. Without the public spectacle and you reacting publicly, they can't move the agenda forward. So they need the Roman arena.
Yes. And
they need you in the arena fighting to get the crowd to support them. Because they're going to come at you antagonistically. They need your reaction to then create the synthesis.
I think that's a really relevant point too. And when I look at it, a lot of the military guys I've spoken to, like, I've had General Flynn on, we've had Colonel McGregor on, we've had Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer on, and they all say the same thing, that getting involved in those big groups and creating issues publicly is not the way to handle things. What you should actually be doing is taking a look at local politics in your area and saying, okay, well, how is my school board being handled? How is my mayoral election being handled? Because getting involved locally is actually what starts to fix things, right? Because you're not getting involved in this big kind of public clash that they want, because then it does, number one, it gets you in trouble legally, but number two, it creates the justification for the synthesis we're talking about.
That's right. That's right. Now, there is a way to defeat this publicly in their arena, but you've got to be very, very in control of your emotions, and I'm paraphrasing from The Art of War. Which I keep handy.
My copy's in my office. It's in the next building.
So in The Art of War, he talks about know yourself, know thy enemy. If you know both, you can win.
Yes.
And that's the key insight. So what you want to do, and you can see there are some people that argue in the public domain that do very well at exposing the cultural Marxism and then its insanity.
And I think there's a lot of value in that as well, but I don't think you can like I think you look at like what happened on January 6th. When we saw that whole thing happen, I said to my wife, I'm like, I ain't fucking going there, because I'll tell you right now, like something stupid's going to happen, because you need one person to do something stupid and then it just snowballs. Absolutely.
But I'm just saying you can go, there's some very good, articulate, libertarian-minded, they may not belong to the Libertarian Party, but they're liberty-minded people that go to college campuses and publicly and calmly, logically dismantle their insanity.
Charlie Kirk does an excellent job of this.
Charlie Kirk.
The Turning Point USA goes around the country. They have conversations, because I think that's what it comes down to, man.
Yes.
It's awareness and conversations. And I think there's a lot of people that get charged up by the idea of fighting back and revolution and things like that. And I think that is a very stupid approach, because if you look at it, it's aggressive. It gets other people in trouble. It creates situations. When we look at it, we can resolve a lot of things with communication. And I think we've forgotten about that.
Yeah, and it's not only just, but you've got to be strategic and knowledgeable before you communicate. You can't just go and I'm going to communicate. You have to understand their insanity and their intentions. And by exposing their insanity and intentions, logically, in the public forum, they do not want that. You have to remember, they're not coming into the forum with logic. They're coming there with an agenda for the synthesis, and they're going to goad you for the reaction to get to that synthesis. So let me give you...
It's logic versus emotion, right? When you're coming at it with a logical argument versus an emotional argument.
So let me give you an example. So some transgender teachers or transgender speakers are going to talk about transgender rights to a group of 5-year-olds at your school. What do you think the emotional response is going to be when they show up?
It's going to be pretty charged up, I would think.
Right. Okay. So parents come in, they grab the books, they rip down the flags, and this is all part of the public spectacle that they were hoping to have.
Correct.
See, they're against we told you that they're transgender bullies. They're book burning. They're they're a bunch of bullies and book burners.
So it's having the result in mind when you take the action.
Right. But what if you showed up and you reframed it logically and said, I'm not here to take your books. I'm not here to have your flag down. This is a free country. You have free speech. I just want to expose you as pedophiles. Yeah. And I'm here to just expose the fact that you are here after my children. I know what your agenda is. I'm not going to react to it. And let me go over why you're going after children. Now, if you're doing that in the public spectacle and you're not taking down their flags and you're not burning their books and you're not calling them names and you're having a discourse and your argument is accurate.
Well, and that's things I've talked about in libertarian and conservative circles. If you look at it, I even think how the presidential campaign right now is going is really stupid.
Yes.
Donald Trump's been attacking Ron DeSantis, and Ron actually did a pretty darn good job, which I don't get. And so, and it's, to me, it's iron should sharpen iron here, guys. A good argument should force us to have a better argument rather than a stupid argument should force us to have a dumber argument.
Right. You know who really understands this the best? And I don't agree with everything he says, but
we don't have to agree, but I think we do have to have better arguments because we're challenged.
Yeah. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. understands how to go in with information. He's not at conflict. You can tell that this conflict of, with the synthesis is not his agenda.
So we actually heard back from his team yesterday. They're not putting a date on it, but we've made the list of shows that RFK wants to do. So we're excited about that.
Wow, that's awesome. I really admire the manner in which he goes about, because there are people.
It's well researched. It's articulate.
That's the key to winning the battle. See, when we become well researched, and we've got the truth on our side and we articulate the truth in the public forum, we will win more and more minds over.
Yes.
See, if we fall into the trap, you have to remember they need the reaction to get the synthesis.
Correct.
Without the reaction and exposing their dialectic publicly and articulately, I'm going to tell you something that is on the favor of the sane and the rational. No one on either side of the aisle, Marxist, capitalist, Democrat, Republican, black, white, Christian, Muslim, whatever you think is the conflict, everyone will agree with this. No one likes to be manipulated.
I can agree with that.
If you can show that the intention of the person using the dialectic is to manipulate others, and you can prove that, they will lose support from all sides.
Mm-hmm.
See, even let's say there's a liberal who just thinks that Joe Biden is God's gift to earth. But what if they found out that Biden was trying to manipulate them? Same with Trump. What if a Republican who believed in Trump and then he found out in whatever way that Trump was manipulating? Yeah. Once you feel that you are being manipulated, all loyalty is lost.
Mm-hmm. It's divisive. And I think when people find something divisive, they see the intent of it, I would hope.
Right. I mean, how many times have people been in love with somebody in business or a relationship, find out that the other person's manipulating them, all of a sudden it turns into a divorce or a lawsuit?
Oh, man. So I got to bring Masterpiece Theater back in. This is the only TV I watch, by the way, is like British television on PBS.
Yeah.
And they had this one show. It's called The Durrells, and they're living in Corfu, right? So they're living in like a Greek island.
Yep.
And the guy is dating this girl, and all of a sudden he finds out she's pregnant, and the father comes over at the point of a gun and says, "You have to marry me." And finds out that she was actually pregnant when she met him, and she met him so that she could say it was his baby. And I was like, oh, that's kind of rough, man. So it's like when you see people's intentions, you're like, oh, I just don't like that.
Right. So let's say that's the example. Mm-hmm. Maybe he fell in love with her. Okay, I do want to marry you because, it's my baby. I want to take responsibility for you. We'll make this work. But then he finds out it's somebody else's baby. What happens the moment that he discovers that this girl that he supposedly loved was manipulating him?
Betrayal.
All the love is gone.
Betrayal after trust.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do is, like Sun Tzu says in The Art of War, is we have to know the enemy of mankind.
Mm.
We have to know their schemes. We have to articulate. And once we, in that public circle, see, they're getting into the public circle to create the conflict. And all of a sudden, we're not there to conflict. Their game is over. Mm-hmm. And we show them the intention behind their desire to create conflict. Mm-hmm. And once we show that manipulation, their game is over, and they lose their audience. Charlie Kirk, there's some other people that do that very well, where people go, wait a minute, I kind of was leaning towards that thing, but now, now that Charlie showed me that I'm being manipulated, there's what was it? Something like in 2020, I don't know the exact number, but, 8%, maybe 10% of the black vote went for Donald Trump. If the election was held today, I think the numbers are like 20%. So 10, 12, maybe 14% are going, wait a minute, Biden isn't the guy that I thought he was.
Yeah.
See, because as we expose Joe Biden and his laptop stuff and his kid stuff and this stuff and China and all that, people going, wait a minute, I thought he was a good man. I feel betrayed. He's losing ground because we're exposing his true intentions for power.
Yes.
That's what we have to do in the conversations that you and I have. We have to do that on social media. We have to, like we're doing right now, by educating people one-on-one or through podcasts. I keep telling people, if you were to just take a half hour of your TV time and read a chapter a day of a book, any book about whatever, about Marxism, about the art of war, about social issues, about politics, about business.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's important too, because I know, I've read Das Kapital, I've read the Communist Manifesto, I've read these documents, so I understand what these things are when I observe them. And I think the issue is, I don't want to go after people for being not educated, but I do want to say, we should be seeking to get more educated about subjects, because when we are arguing these things publicly, our inability to understand them or articulate them makes the whole movement look bad.
Right. So, look, if you go in the example. So let's say your local school is going to have some drag queens and they're going to read these drag queen books, whatever they are, the LGBTQ. And you go, I don't want my child to be exposed to that information. It's my child. Now, the state's going to say, sorry, they're in public school. Back to you don't own anything. We own your child during that time. We determine what your child's going to learn. Right? So do you see how the conflict's starting to begin? They're looking for that reaction, the book burning, the taking down the flag, so that they can have their synthesis. What you have to understand is, okay, how do I do this intellectually, intelligently, that not only does not play into their hands of having conflict and emotional reaction, but I'm also going to turn on their own game upon them in the public circle and just watch their support drop as I articulate their actual intention. Not we're trying to bring everybody together.
Yes.
So when you can do that, you'll actually get the result that you were hoping to by being reactionary. But reactionary is not the path. It's through logical, strategic communication.
Yes.
That's the path to success that we need to learn and deploy.
Absolutely. Well, Ed, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. For people listening, they want to connect with you, they want to find out more. How are they going to do that, man?
They can go to my website, 10x, the number 10x.vegas, and I've got plenty of places where they can fill out a form and reach out to me. I'm also on Instagram at Edwin Dear, DEAR, and those two places you'll be able to find me.
Absolutely. Well, Ed Dearborn, the Regis Philbin of the show, definitely got to have you back on in the future, man.
Absolutely. Thank you. Regis Talks.